Loose fill insulation is a category of materials comprised of ground up different materials and then blown through a hose, usually into an attic space. Okay. The most common one is cellulose, and that one is a pretty awesome material. Okay, it's got a high R value. It's also recycled. It's recycled newspaper, recycled paper products. It's treated with flame retardant, and it's pretty eco-groovy, okay, and pretty effective. You can get recycled denim loose fill insulation. That's a little more expensive, kind of trendy, I guess. And then one thing that everyone should be careful about is that they also used asbestos as loose fill insulation. Or it's not 100% asbestos, but it was mixed with some other kind of material and then blown into attics. Okay, so the real problem with this is, we're trying to avoid turning asbestos into dust. It's already dust once it's up here. Okay, so if this is all asbestos insulation, or excuse me, asbestos mixed with some other sort of material, you come up here, walk around. Every time you walk around, you're kicking up the dust. If you try and remove all this stuff, you're going to create a ton of dust, and it's going to hang in the air also. Okay, and we're going to talk more about asbestos, but I talk to people who remove asbestos from their house, and they'll say stuff like, "Oh, well, I wore a mask." Okay, but what about everyone else in the house? What are you going to do for the next 20 years? And if you're just wearing a dust mask, it's essentially done nothing. Okay, so you got to be real careful with this stuff. If you're looking at a house 50s, 60s era, and it has old looking loose fill insulation, I would just say be really careful. Okay, so enough about that for now. Let's move on. Again, we're mostly gonna encounter this in the attic. Okay, I like using this stuff in the attic. It's really effective. Okay, it's easier to do than trying to install fiberglass bats. Also, it's kind of a pain putting fiberglass bats in over your head, stapling them in, cutting around all the lights and the cans. It turns into not a very nice job. Okay, whereas if you're going to blow it in the attic, you can just put in all your plumbing, put in all your wiring, drywall the ceiling, everything's done, and then you come back later and blow it in. And then it's great. It just fills in around all the lights. It settles in around all the pipes and the wires. It's really great at filling those cavities. Okay. There was a time when they were doing this in walls also, really commonly. This was a kind of a big hot thing that people were doing. They'd come around, we can reduce your energy bills, we can make your house more comfortable, we can insulate your walls. Well, how are we going to do that? Are you going to pull off the plaster or tear off the siding? No. They would go around and drill a bunch of holes from the outside, usually, in every stud bay, and they'd stick a hose in and fill up that cavity, usually with cellulose, maybe fiberglass or something like that, and then they'd plug it and paint it, and then they would be insulated for a while until everything settled, and then there was 8 inches at the top of the wall cavity that was uninsulated and potentially having condensation problems and at least being a cold spot on the wall. Okay, so it's kind of turned out to not be that great. But if you ever are looking at the outside of your house and you're wondering why are there holes every 16 inches that got corked, that's what happened. Somebody came along and filled it up with insulation. Okay, so the nice thing about blowing in insulation is you could build it up really, really high. Okay, whereas with bats, we're limited to a certain thickness and a certain R value. With loose fill insulation, if you want to blow 2 feet of cellulose into your attic space, you can. Okay, you can just keep building it up. Things you need to be really careful about. It's really easy, and I would say common, if people don't pay attention to what's happening at the soffits here, to just cover up those soffit vents. Okay, and then you've totally disrupted the attic ventilation system. So what's normally going to happen, and we'll see a picture here in a minute, but what's normally going to happen is you're going to come around and you're going to install baffles. Okay, so maybe that's a piece of cardboard, maybe it's a piece of foam, but it's just a piece of material that gets stapled to the underside of the trusses and creates a little barrier up against that soffit vent, up against those freeze blocks. And then you can blow insulation up against that baffle and it doesn't cover up that venting. Okay? The other thing that is problematic with this insulation is that people don't air seal first. Okay? People have a hard time comprehending how the stack effect works, how convective loops work, how air movement moves in a wall. Okay? So if you don't seal up any of the lights or any of the plumbing or wiring penetrations or anything like that, and you just blow insulation all over everything, you're going to reduce the conductive thermal transfer into the attic and into the room, vice versa. Okay? It's going to do nothing for convective thermal transfer. Okay? So you could do this really great job blowing in a ton of blown insulation in the attic, but if you didn't seal anything up, you're going to be losing air through all of those penetrations. And air will move through this stuff, and you'll lose conditioned air. Conditioned air will leak into the attic. And then, like we talked about before, that air is going to get replaced somehow, and you're going to be bringing in unconditioned air into the house and losing conditioned air into the attic. And there's going to be this loop, okay? And it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be expensive. Okay, so you need to go around and seal up all those can lights. They have can lights now that have like a gasket on them that seal up against the drywall. So that would be great, okay? But also, it's probably a good idea to get in there with some foam and foam around those can lights, caulk or foam around any pipes or any wire.